To this concurrent session, number 84 of the IAEE conference. The subject is local electricity markets, and I'm very happy to say we have 4 papers that relate to each other unusually well. I expect to have a very active discussion, and certainly for all of us to be learning from each other. My name is James Smith. I am president of the IAEE. And in addition to some professional interest in this topic, I just want to let you all know, especially the speakers, that I am a survivor of the Texas freeze grid meltdown in February. I think many people around the world are familiar with the fact that we came within minutes of crashing the entire state grid. As it was, I was out without power for 3 days, without water for even longer. And over 150 people passed away. So the ability to manage local electricity grids via flexibility and other means is certainly come onto my radar screen in a big way. I also hope that the audience, some of you had a chance to see the the dual plenary session that just finished, which also looked at some of these issues on managing in local electricity markets. But with that, let me turn to our speakers, each of which will have 20 minutes, and then that'll be followed immediately by Q&A time. You can be posting your Q&A to the chat, or you will be able to actually come on with your microphone and ask questions directly. We'll go in the order as presented in the program, which means that we're going to start with Théo Dronne from Électricité de France. And he is going to be talking about how and whether local flexibility in the DSO may be used to manage increasing congestion that's coming with the advance of so many electric demands. So Théo, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mr. Smith. I will share my screen. Okay, I hope it works for everybody. So good afternoon, everybody. I hope you will follow my flow. I apologize for my strong French accent. I hope it will work anyway. So I'm Théo Dronne. I'm making a PhD between Paris Dauphine University, Électricité de France, and I'm presenting my article on congestion management in distribution network, which market design to integrate local flexibility assets considering information and investment incentive issue. Even if it is only my name on this slide, I have written it with Marcelo Saguan and Fabien Roch, who manage my PhD at EDF and Paris Dauphine. So I will briefly present the context and the research question. After I will develop a bit the institutional economic framework who help my analysis to develop my grid analysis. In the third part, I will develop a numerical example with congestion management with a social benevolent planner and one with in liberalized electricity system more realistic. And at the end, I will give my possible market design option. Okay, so the context is simple. I'm pretty sure you all know it. Decentralization of electricity production and evolution of uses will solicit more and more distribution network, and then will necessitate in some area deep evolution and important investment to accommodate this transformation. One of the main problematic which will emerge will be congestion, which means that a lot of network development have to be made, but of course, alternative to this network development, we will gain more and more interest, especially with using flexibility sources and flexibility assets in order to avoid possible costly network development. So several ways emerge to use flexibility, but we analyze in this article, we analyze one of them, which will be local flexibility market. I just make a short reminder because that's my second article of thesis. In the first article, we have notified the different possible market design, and we have especially notified the need of flexibility assets development in some area with a specific market design needed to give the incentive, but without exploring deeply the complexity of this development. Okay, so the state of the art, just to begin before this article, information issue and investment flexibility are still partly uncovered subject. Of course, complexity and coordination between network and assets have been developed in the literature, but mainly around transport purposes. Diversity of local flexibility market design to remunerate the flexibility in a market have been developed and is gaining a lot of interest currently. Distribution location and marginal prices, which have been evocated in the session just before ours, have been developed in the literature as well, but more to allow a short-term management and incentive, not really for investment purpose. And of course, risk for investment and complexity for investment in electricity generation have been developed, but in the literature have not treated the purpose of flexibility assets. The research question in this article, it will be simple. Which market design to integrate local flexibility assets considering coordination investment incentive issue? The main message in this article is that in a dynamic perspective, the first best between development of flexibility uses and network development is not fixed and will change over the time. In a real world, arbitrage is very harder to realize because network development is made by the network operator, but flexibility sources investment is made by another. So in this article, we highlight two central problematics: the asymmetric information between the two stakeholders and the lack of commitment in some market developed so far. We propose an additional element to the short-term local flexibility market develop in some areas, long-term capacity auction to give the proper incentive in local flexibility assets development. And we also advise some regulation aspects to enhance this incentive. The methodology, I will present it very fastly. We develop grid analysis based on institutional economic. We illustrate how arbitrage between network development and flexibility uses will be realized, and we give market design and regulation recommendation. Okay, so the framework for our analysis is based on institutional economic. If you're not familiar with it, that's a kind of economics developed mainly by Williamson, but which is very used for electricity sector so far. So what we show here is that depending on many considerations, the market is not the pure market. I mean, is not the only answer for problematic and mainly for incentive investment. What we say here is in a flexibility market, it will have two main characteristics. The assets will be considered as specific because for flexibility assets which will be used for distribution issue will not fully participate to the market, and the uncertainty linked to the asymmetry of information will be very important because it will have an important impact of a possible remuneration for the assets. So the lack of commitment with a specific asset will be very important because if the asset is developed specifically for network congestion, a lack of commitment from the DSO will have an important impact of the value. In case of investment value for investment deferral lack of commitment, it will create a risk which is very important for specific assets, which we call opportunism. In the case of flexibility assets, there is only one buyer, which will be the DNO, and if the DNO is changing the strategy without commitment, of course, the investor loses the whole value. So asymmetric information for market actor is based on And 3 main points: network cost and data, mainly in a distribution network, are not fully transparent. Network cost is not uniform at all. It will change deeply between areas, and network development will be different from the social optimum because of an appropriated incentive from the current regulation still in place in many countries in Europe. Okay, so the simplified example we develop here is firstly with a social benevolent planner. We want to highlight how the arbitrage between network development and flexibility development will be realized in case of a social benevolent planner. So here we show an objective function, which will be to minimize the total cost paid for the dispatch. Because I have not so much time, I show you the assumption we consider. Of course, that's not a use case, that's a theoretical case, but we base our assumption on some realistic aspect, but it can be discussed, of course. What we want to show here, here we show our example on 5 years with the evolution on the consumptions between the year 1 and the year 5 to show how the dispatch and how the perfect strategy will evolve for a social benevolent planner. Okay, so what we want to show is when you consider a first reference scenario with a network development cost, you will have one first strategy, will be a repartition between development of network and development on flexibility assets to avoid costly network development. So what we show in this first example with the first consideration of network cost is that the flexibility asset is used during the 5 years to solve the remaining congestion. We can so understand that the flexibility assets developed for this purpose will gain a remuneration during the 5 years. In the second case, with another network cost considered, you can see the slides, and the flexibility assets will be only used during the 2 first years, but after, because the hours of congestion evolve and we're not considering the same network cost, the flexibility assets is only used during 2 years, and after it remains unused, which means no remuneration for the investors, and then an important risk to not cover your fixed cost you have developed for this investment. So in a second example, we consider we analyze a flexibility investment in an energy-only local flexibility market, as it was, for example, developed in the literature, but also in initiative as an ERA. ERA is an initiative of markets in Germany. So what I have already mentioned in the introduction is that congestion management and network development will be realized by network operator, but flexibility sources to avoid possible network development will be realized by the regulated investor. There are two separate stakeholders, so with different information, different incentive, and possible different strategy, which will at the end, if the market design gives not the proper answer, become a problem. I will illustrate it. So here we develop an example to optimize social welfare with a 2 stage. On the first stage, the flexibility provider decide if they will develop flexibility or not, with 3 possibilities: perfect information sharing and commitment, information sharing without commitment, or no commitment and no information sharing. On the second stage, network reinforcement decision will be made by the network operator if the flexibility asset is developed or not. Otherwise, the only strategy is to develop network development, is to write the network development. Okay, so that I want to share here is that without commitment and without information sharing, the income expected by the flexibility investor will not be the same, of course. And at the end, because of this lack of information sharing or this lack of commitment, because the market design doesn't give the proper incentive, we have an impact on the social cost paid by the society, because we have a need to develop network instead of using flexibility assets, because flexibility assets have not been developed by the other stakeholder, which is the deregulated investors. So the message of this slide is because they don't have this specific information and face a lack of commitment, the whole society will pay it at the end. Okay, so what we propose to add to a short-term local flexibility market is a long-term capacity auction. Long-term capacity auction have been already developed in the literature for classical, if I can mention it, classical electricity assets. Here, it will have a free property, very interesting for this kind of market design. It will reveal information and willingness from the network operator. Then it will allow to the regulated investors to have a better view on the strategy from the network operator. It will flatten the opportunism of the network operator, which means that the network operator will not use flexibility for 1 or 2 years and then develop network, which will impact the regulated investors. And at the end, it will, of course, reduce market risk and short-term income exposure, which is always a purpose for investment in capital-intensive flexibility assets. This action will be combined with short-term energy market, of course. We also advise evolution of regulation aspects. The first one is the development and information sharing by the DSO. Why? Because in the past, so the information sharing, which have already been made at the transport level, have not been established for distribution network. So it will be very important to establish what we will call pre-contractual belief. Then again to flatten the opportunism and to ensure information sharing between the two stakeholders. The other regulation aspect will be an equal approach for CapEx and OpEx for network development, because sometimes you will face an incentive to the network, to the distribution network operator to develop network, even if it's for the social aspect, it's more valuable to use the flexibility assets, but because they have a remuneration from the networks they develop, the optimal choice will not be made. Okay, so the conclusion already been developed. There is two main problematic for incentive in development of local flexibility assets, and which will face a problematic with a short-term local flexibility market, which will be asymmetric information and lack of commitment. These two problematic will lead to suboptimal level of investment and then to a problematic for social welfare. To answer to this risk, market design and regulation should evolve, and we propose to add a main element, which is long-term capacity auction. We also advise to main regulation evolution. I already mentioned it. Okay, I hope I'm still on the time, and thank you very much.
Very good. Thank you, Théo. You were very good with the time, and we now have an interval open for questions from the audience, and you can either post that in the chat box, or you can simply open your mic and post whatever question you have. While people are thinking about that, Théo, let me start with one question that I had, and that is regarding the proposed long-term capacity auctions. And clearly you focused on the problem of information sharing or asymmetric information. I take it that's really quite complicated information that would be relevant for someone investing in flexibility. And I guess I'd just like you, if you can, to expand on the extent to which you think a price in an auction like that can really aggregate the kind of information as much as would be needed to serve the interests of both sides.
Thank you. That's a very good question. I'm not sure the price will not vehiculate the whole information, but it will give confidence for an investor on the possible remuneration. So provide as least a part of the answer. What we advise here is a scheme close to what is already been developed in UK, for example, with the UKPN, to attract some possible investment and to give a good vision of where is the area where the value is most important for flexibility assets. They give possible remuneration for capacity, and then they send an incentive to these investors. And if you are able to give us this service, the value for the society is more in this area than in another.
Okay, thank you. I see Ellen Beckstedt has her hand up. Go ahead.
Yes. Hello. I really liked your presentation. I'm a PhD student working on flexibility markets and more strategic behavior. So the topic was really familiar for me. Actually, like I'm also in a European project, and here we are doing interviews with DSOs on this trade-off between flexibility and investments. And we see one of the main issues is actually like, how do you do this trade-off? Because how do you define this cost of this flexibility, as it is still rather unknown? So I was wondering, how did you approach this this uncertainty, or like which assumptions did you make to address this? I would be interested to hear your approach on this.
That's a very good question. To be honest, I'm more on the in this article. I was more focused on the opposite side, like the incertitude from the investor, but not really from the DSO. So I'm not sure I really have a good answer to give you, because of course the uncertainty from the DSO is also an aspect. What I try to mention is maybe they have better information from than the investor on the where is the value, what is the value, etc. But of course they do not have the whole information. To be a bit clear in my article, I take the assumption that DSO have the whole information, then they have to share it. But the reality is, of course, more complicated, and that's what I mentioned at the end in my conclusion of my article. Then the landscape is very uncertain, even for DSO. So that's why market design is very hard to establish.
Thank you.
Abbas Hussain, go ahead.
Hi, Theo. Thanks very much for your presentation. It was very good. One question I had was, I completely agree. And I suppose when I talk a little bit about, my experience of evaluating flexibility, we landed on a very similar conclusion that flexibility providers need longer term certainty, revenue certainty. And so I was just curious to get your views on how you define this longer term. Is it 1 year, 2 years, 4 years plus? Like, is there anything that you acquired as part of like your work in terms of how long should this long term be?
Here again, I will take I will inspire my thinking from UK call partners. They have developed a contract until 7 years, if I don't make any mistake. And it was, but I think Ms. Anaya has more information about it than me. But it was a ask from the developer. So I mean, if they ask 7 years at least, I will follow them and say 7 years is a long term enough. Of course, if I inspire myself from the classical asset of electricity, there are more than around 10 years than 7 years, because considering that 2 years of contract is a long-term contract does not seem very relevant, I think. So I will say at least 7 years from my point of view.
Very good. Don't hold back if you have a question. In the meantime, I wanted to ask you, you talked about the need to adapt regulations to be able to manage the flexibility efficiently, and particularly suggested using an equal approach on CapEx and OpEx. And I just wondered if you could expand and be a little more specific on the points at issue with that.
Okay. Yes, in several countries, in France, if I'm correct, the remuneration to the DSO is based on the capex they develop. Then, if you develop more, you develop capex, more you develop networks, more you get remuneration. And when the regulator will have a look on your account or on your yes, if you're serious or not, they will have a deeper look on your OPEX and then tell you, okay, maybe you have some efforts to do on this aspect. But if you want to get more remuneration, of course, the regulation is more complex than I develop, but you have to develop more network and not use alternative solution. You will think I take my whole inspiration from UK, but in UK, they since several years, they developed the TOTEX approach, which is your regulator is focused on your whole expense, which means capex and opex, and then you are just the willingness to reduce the whole, but not only capex. So it looks more appropriate with the current issue in the distribution network, but unfortunately that have not been developed in the whole European country.
Okay, very good. Do we have other questions? And if not, then we can proceed to the next presentation, this one by Abbas Hussain. And he is with Frontier Economics Company, and going to be talking about the DSO's ability to manage the system to the extent it could potentially be enhanced using which particular instruments to provide local flexibility, and also involving a real options approach. And so, Abbas, I'm giving it to you.
Thank you very much. I'm just going to go ahead and share my screen. For some reason, it is not letting me do that.
I'm here for this kind of problem. So normally everybody has the right to share his or her slides. Theo, did you quit? Yeah.
I think I'm just able to do it now. Is that you see my
working?
Yeah. Excellent. Perfect. Let me just put this on presentation mode. Thanks very much. Can you all still see it?
Looks good. Looks good.
Excellent. So hi, everyone. My name is Abbas Hussain. I'm a manager at Frontier Economics. And today I will be talking about a methodology that we have developed alongside various electricity network market participants in the UK.
And Abbas, maybe you could put it to presentation mode to blow.
It is in presentation mode, actually.
Okay, I'm seeing the string of slides down the left-hand side, but
is that? Can you
click on slideshow?
In the top white bar, yeah.
Yeah.
And then from the beginning.
Cool. Do you see it now?
No change. Well,
yeah,
I don't want to interrupt you. Go ahead. We can see it clearly enough.
I will maybe make it a little bit bigger to improve the experience a little bit. Apologies for that. And reduce this. Is that better?
That's fine. There we go.
Okay. Yeah. So so just to give you like a little bit of an introduction about the methodology we have developed. It has been done alongside various participants in the electricity networks in the UK. And it essentially looks at how you can think about evaluating flexibility as an alternative to network reinforcement, and how you can actually place a value on flexibility. And when we talk about flexibility here, it's very much focused on the local flexibility. So it pertains to sort of distributed energy resources being deployed to resolve constraints or provide various system services to both distribution system operators and transmission system operators, because there's no reason why one should be precluded from that. And just to give you a bit of an introduction, Frontier Economics is a specialized economic consultancy. We work across European energy markets in various service areas. I focus in particular in our energy practice, as part of which we advise a broad range of stakeholders in the energy markets, from policymakers to energy companies to finance professionals or lawyers who get involved in the markets. And this particular engagement, as I mentioned, we have developed in conjunction with one of our good clients, Scottish and Southern Electricity Networks, which is a distribution system operator in the south and north of the UK. And developed in conjunction with them, we have then discussed it with the regulator Ofgem. We have also presented our work to the Energy Networks Association. Some of you may be familiar that as part of the Open Networks project, one of the work streams focused on flexibility has been looking specifically at how to develop a common evaluation methodology for evaluating flexibility as an alternative to network reinforcements, which has come up with an option at the end of last year that a lot of the distributed network operators here are thinking about deploying. But then there have also been a few other improvements that have been suggested to this methodology, particularly in relation to how it can evaluate other options like flexible connections or energy efficiency alongside flexibility as an alternative to network reinforcement, and also how it can actually more appropriately provide for the option value that flexibility offers. So just by means of context, and I'm not going to go into it a little bit in too much detail, but it's worth mentioning that this is happening in a background of transitioning energy system. The need for flexibility has become evident in events like that happened in Texas, yes, but then you sort of are looking at a landscape where you're evolving in a direction where you could envision there being an increase in currents of constraints arising on the distribution networks, and there being a greater need for more active management of the distribution networks going forward. Because whereas historically power generated on higher voltage networks could be stepped down to distribution networks and to the end consumers, in that world, DNOs would optimize their networks to meet almost like an exogenous consumer demand of electricity being generated upstream, and had a relatively simple decision to make about how much network to build and where, and or indeed to do nothing if they had sufficient capacity. In the electric system of the future, you're going to start seeing lots more smaller scale renewable generation, particularly connecting directly onto the distribution grids. You will also start seeing consumers more proactively taking on, I guess, using electricity for transport and heat sectors as opposed to the alternative fossil fuels. And these are electricity intensive appliances and have the potential of thereby increasing constraints on these networks. And what this essentially means is that these more complex power flows that will now start rising on the distribution grids more increasingly so, will A, require more investment as there is an increase in demand, but B, will also require them to actively evaluate which particular investment options to choose from. So on the one hand, they can continue to, of course, build networks where demand for electricity is more certain, and it's quite clear that there is a need for more capacity. But in situations where the demand for electricity is uncertain, because it is not quite clear yet how many EVs are going to start connecting onto the distribution grid, as from where we are currently looking. or indeed, even if you have a sense of how many electric vehicles will be connecting to the distribution grid, you don't know exactly what their specific locations are going to be. And this uncertainty is, in a sense, what creates like a need for an evolution towards a more flexible system, where the distribution system operators more actively manage their networks by engaging with these distributed energy resources that can flexibly alter their consumption of production, guided by various price signals or under various incentives. And I suppose, it might be worth also introducing very briefly what flexibility is. It's as I mentioned, it's in the simplest sense, it's a modification of generation or consumption patterns in response to an external signal. It is a definition. Similar definition has been provided by Ofgem in the UK, and quite similar definitions have started emerging at the sort of European level. This is fast emerging as an area which requires sort of additional regulatory guidance in light of ensuring that the best practices are adopted going forward, and particularly to make sure that as distribution system operators embark on these missions to start procuring more flexibility, that they do so in a manner which is consistent with how transmission system operators have been procuring flexibility for many years before on the higher voltage levels, and in a coordinated fashion. So it provides for joint procurement of flexibility across both these participants. And off the back of like these developments, a number of flexibility platforms have come across various EU member states. I won't go into too much detail. I assume Karim is probably going to talk about that in a bit more detail, but it's probably worth mentioning that we are also working with NSOE at the moment, looking at some of these flexibility platforms to sort of identify what are the various metrics which are common across them and what are the key differences, in a sense, with a view to once again try to identify best practices in which these flexibility markets continue to evolve and develop going forward. So I suppose moving on to the question before us today, the idea is that against this background of demand uncertainty, DSOs have, in a sense, a set of choices to make. They can choose to build more network. Thanks to these would be, pylons and more electricity wires and substations, etc. Alternatively, they could contract with flexibility services. So these could be, things like demand-side response, storage, distributed generation, indeed anything that could, in certain time periods, either increase consumption or increase their production to help balance the demand supply on the network. And traditional reinforcement would typically, will take about 4 years' time to build, and will usually resolve the need for network capacity for over a 20 to 40 year lifespan. Flexibility services network operators would like to contract for them as in a shorter time frame as possible, but as Theo was talking about, there has been a sort of a need that has been conveyed by flexibility providers that they require more revenue certainty, and 4 to 7 year contracts have been what have come out in principle as viable options that flexibility providers are willing to commit around and secure the requisite investment around, and then be able to provide the services when the system operators need them. So one of the approaches that have come up has been developed as part of the open networks process has been relatively simple, and as a result of its simplicity, does not fully capture the option value of flexibility. So very simply put, it takes the savings you can sort of, in a sense, realize from delaying a large investment today on a net present value basis. And if that savings is greater than the costs of procuring or entering into a flexibility contract, say for 4 years or 7 years, whatever time period it be, then it sort of gives you the go ahead to actually start using flexibility instead of building the investment. But there are a few essential problems with this approach. And first and foremost is that it is, in a sense, assumed or presumed that deferring the capex investment to be built sometime later in the period is the only value that flexibility can provide. It also assumes that there's a fixed length of time over which this deferral can in a sense happen, like say it's 4 years or it could be 7 years, but it's still relatively fixed. It's also assumes that once this period of time has sort of expired, that the conventional reinforcement will occur. And by doing so, it does not really provide for the option that if, say, forecasts change, or if, like, say, demand does not increase as much as it was expected to be, say, because there was not as many EVs as you expected to, connect to the grid as, ended up happening, then it doesn't really provide for that eventuality that by entering into a flexibility contract, the system operators can actually, decide not to do anything at the end of that period. So in a sense, it does not capture the additional optionality of not committing to a conventional reinforcement. And while this is still workable in circumstances where you have significant certainty about higher demand materializing, and indeed some operators would argue that that's the case, because when they look in their networks and they see the incentives that the governments are providing, they do see lots more people signing up to get EVs, lots more people starting to heat their homes using electricity. So in those areas, this kind of an approach would make sense. But where uncertainty is significantly more, say because you don't know precisely how many EVs will be locating where, and hence where exactly you would be needing that network capacity. And indeed that in different states of the world, like say where hydrogen starts to play a big role in decarbonizing the heating sector, and you don't really need as much electric heat pumps coming on in a particular region, that uncertainty is not fully factored into an approach like this. And so I suppose what we discussed with various individuals was like an alternative approach, which would sort of look at this problem from a decision tree framework perspective, and it is in a sense not different from like how option theory would be deployed as part of valuing like a financial option. And so what we assume is like there's a 32-year time horizon made up of 8 4-year periods, 4 years guided by the 4-year duration of the minimum 4-year duration of the flexibility contract that flexibility providers have conveyed a preference for. And then we evaluate 4 actions that are available in each of these 4-year periods. So it could be you build a traditional network, you buy flexibility, you do a combination of reinforcement or flexibility. So you basically end up building a smaller piece of network, or you indeed do nothing. And you evaluate these actions across a few different states of the world. So in the simplest sense, it can be low, medium, and high demand growth. And then you set this up into a decision tree framework and solve by backward induction, not very different from how you would evaluate a financial option. Now, what it does require you to do is like input a lot of assumptions. So first and foremost are you don't only have to identify what possible states of the world you envision in the future. You also have to, in a sense, identify what likelihood you would attribute to them. So, and this, in a sense, was one of the hardest thing to for us to like when working with network operators was to like say like, well, okay, so you do envision low, medium, and high demand to materialize, but can you say with sufficient certainty that low demand would materialize 30% of the time versus like medium demand being 50% of the time, or high being the remaining 20%? And how do you like actually then go about choosing how much likelihood you attribute to each of these different states of the world? And then other than these probabilities of states of the world, you also have like a set of like of costs that you have to like then set out. So in the simplest sense, it can be the capital expenditure associated with network reinforcement. It can be the operating expenditure associated with flexibility, OPEX. And then you can have a range of other costs that you can consider. I think in this setup, we considered the outage costs that would materialize in the event an intervention in the form of either building the network or deploying flexibility was not undertaken. And then the model basically sort of takes in all these inputs and minimizes the expected total societal costs. And solving this using a decision tree framework through backward induction, and provides like an output which basically provides what the optimal decision would be today, so covering for the next 4-year period, but also what the optimal decision would look like in each 4-year periods going forward. Now, a key thing to emphasize in all of this is that a lot of these inputs are well, firstly, quite hard to determine, as I mentioned, as is the case with probabilities, and also quite subjective, because and both subjective and localized, because what the cost of capex would be and what the cost of opex would be. And as a question was recently just asked, like, how do you even know what the cost of flexibility is in a world where local flexibility markets are so nascent? And you would pretty much expect that at a time when they are so young, that the costs are likely to be higher than at a later point in time when you have more liquid flexibility markets, which would lead to the costs coming down in the future. So how do you provide for a lot of these things? And this subjectivity actually then is a key thing that leads us to believe that however way you use this setup, you can't think of it as like the model providing you an actual decision. But what it does help you do is that by imposing a structure and thinking about what your optimal actions in future periods could be, it helps answer a more relevant question, perhaps, which is that what would I need to believe for this to be the optimal action? So, if, say, how high my expectation of the likelihood of low demand materializing can be before the model switches from the optimal decision from flexibility to network reinforcement or vice versa, and these sort of almost like these identification of thresholds in a sense is perhaps the best value that you can get out of it. So I mean, I suppose I won't go into all that much detail about all the various inputs that you would go into, but perhaps I'll just walk very quickly through how the framework works. You start off by identifying, I think this is a simplified interpretation of what I've just set up. We've omitted some actions and are only showing 2 periods, whereas there will be, multiple 4-year periods going forward over, say, like a 32-year horizon. And in the, say today, if you decide to build a network, then you perhaps settled for the next 20 years and you don't require any further investment. But if you decide today to either flex or do nothing, then in the next 4-year period, you have the option to do a conventional reinforcement, deploy flexibility, or do nothing. And this, in a sense, this optionality is what is the value that you're trying to assess, because you would be doing that at a later point in time when you have a bit more information compared to the time period here, when perhaps you had a greater uncertainty about how much demand would actually materialize. And so you then set out your costs for all future periods, and then solve through backward induction what would be the sort of the least cost, which path would have the least cost associated with it. And it's important to note that lowest total expected cost is one of few other metrics you could consider. It could easily be adapted to consider instead maximum or least regrets. So, what would be the path with the highest possible cost associated with it, and perhaps you would like to, avoid that. So we applied this framework to, a recent project on the SSE networks, and saw some very interesting results, basically, which we found quite naturally to be very much conditional in a sense upon the underlying assumptions. And so where we assumed the high probability of slow demand growth in the future, we saw that the model provided for deploying a CMZ solution, which is a flexibility solution, in the first state of the world, and then under low demand scenario, it said that you will actually not require any investment in its own dimension, and switching back to flexibility in the future. But in a higher demand situation, it would actually switch to a traditional network reinforcement after deploying flexibility in the first state of the world. And if you then play around with the probabilities and instead provide for high probability of fast demand growth, the model switches to providing for conventional reinforcement as early as in the first period, and then that continues going forward. Yeah, I suppose
you need to wrap up in the next couple minutes if you can.
Yes, certainly. I guess the final point to make is around this all being quite conditional upon both initial assumptions that you make about what will happen in the first 4-year period, but also in what you're expecting to happen in the later periods. So there is quite a lot of I think the best value that you can see from like this setup is actually to see how like these decisions change as you increase your capex, or you decrease your opex, or you change your probability expectations around whether low, medium, or high demand would materialize. And it allows you to like sort of identify at which thresholds of time the solutions that you have set out become less or more optimal with time. So with that, I would like to conclude. Thanks very much, and would appreciate any questions or comments.
Thank you very much, Abbas. It's very interesting. And we do have time for questions from the audience. So raise your hand or type into chat. And I had, again, a question to begin with, Abbas, and that is looking at the decision tree from the real options perspective. You've actually presented a much richer model than I found in the abstract, where it was simply a kind of a one look ahead. And so it appears that what you have here are embedded options, really, that allow you to take a staged approach, maybe incorporating and adapting to information that changes, which leads to my question, and that is, it seems to me that those conditional probabilities of transitioning, say, from a low to a high demand from one epoch to the next would play a pretty important role in whether you really need the embedded options, kind of the far horizon, or if it gets locked in because the conditional probability is of continuing, essentially the demand uncertainty gets resolved once we have witnessed the population of EVs, for example, then you wouldn't really need to look ahead so far. You could have a more concise model. That's just my conjecture. I wondered if you've thought about that or done any analysis of the role that those transition probabilities actually play.
Yeah, I think that's a very good question. And one of the things that we struggled with the most was actually because coming up with the value of what these conditional probabilities should be. Because as you can imagine, if you're speaking to a network operator, they might have a better sense about how likely they expect low, medium, or high demand to be in the next 4-year period. But then it's much harder to say that conditional upon low, medium, or high demand materializing in the first 4-year period, what then is the likelihood of there being low, medium, or high demand materializing thereafter? So where we ended on was essentially the idea that rather than defining these values like specifically, that we would present them as almost an input that you could flex around with to sort of see that if you sort of assume that you were agnostic across the 3 states of the world, what it would look like compared to a hypothetical situation where you expected high demand to materialize across all states of the future worlds and across all future periods with a much higher likelihood than, say, an alternative where you expected low demand to materialize more so. So the idea was to allow the network operators to be able to explore the full gamut of the range of solutions that could materialize by flexing the different assumptions. So that's sort of where we left it. But this is, of course, it is worth mentioning that, these, well, first of all, this evaluation period doesn't have to be 4 years. Like if, say, you were able to procure flexibility in a shorter time frame, then this could happen on an annual or by annual basis, and perhaps that would be more appropriate because most network operators tend to update their demand forecasts on an annual basis. So there's no reason why this analysis shouldn't be updating each time you have better information about the future, and then you can sort of extend that that going forward. So it's like, so there are, in a sense, several refinements to this analysis that we had identified as well. Firstly, and then secondly, this had to be a simplistic application of what could be a very complicated theoretical problem, because the ultimate goal was to develop something where you could actually, take a point of the network and say, okay, these are the 3 options that I have envisaged for this point in the network. How do I weigh them against each other? And then sort of see what my optimal course of action is.
Right. I see Theo's hand up, and then after that, I'll call on Christine, who's also has her hand up. So Theo?
Yes, thank you very much for this interesting presentation. I'm very interested to go deeper into the study. Just 2 short questions. From which technology do you consider the flexibility?
From which, sorry?
From which technology, from where the flexibility is coming? And just for the contract also, what do you consider as contract? Only capacity remuneration or a mix between capacity and energy?
Yeah, no, these are both great questions. As in the first, in relation to the first question, our sort of desire from the onset was to make sure that this was as technology agnostic as possible, because realizing that distributed energy resources comprise a vast range of options. Like they can be dispatchable generation, but also dispatchable load and storage, EVs, you name it, everything in the middle. So the idea was to sort of think about this in the context of a flexibility solution. Now, of course, I mean, the choice of flexibility would determine what costs you ended up inputting into the thing. And in this particular context, it was, I guess, mobile generation, which ended up informing those costs. But the idea was that we would sort of see the sensitivities of, if, say, you were able to get a cheaper flexibility from a demand response provider, then how would that then change the optimal solution? You could sort of adjust the OpEx accordingly and then watch the optimal decision change. Now, in relation to your second question on what the contract itself should be, that ultimately depends on the type of the service. So you might be familiar that in the UK there are these 4 standard flexibility products that have emerged, and which are still in the process of being discussed and evaluated. They're called Sustain, Secure, Dynamic, and Restore. And they're quite different in terms of what is it that they are procuring for, as well as how long ahead they procure flexibility for, and what is the likelihood of the dispatchability, for example. So there's a combination of both availability and utilization payments that are associated with these products that vary. The structure of the payments vary depending on the product characteristics. So, for example, for a restore service, which is more like a close to real-time service, currently they have proposed it purely on a utilization basis, so an energy-only basis without availability. But it has led a lot of flexibility providers to then sort of say, why would I enter into a service where there's very limited likelihood of me being deployed, because you're only going to use me if there is an extreme event that, say, materializes on your network. The chances of it, at least for the time being, are quite low. So does it make sense for me to remain a state of some availability in the hope that you will dispatch me, and when the time comes, I will, have lost maybe alternative revenue streams as part of maintaining that state of availability? So that is then is motivating discussions around whether these utilization payments should be supplemented with some sort of an availability payment to make sure that you provide the flexibility providers, in a sense, compensate them for the opportunity cost. So there are proposals about what the payment structure should be for each of these payment types, but they are still in the process of being evaluated, because as DNO, distributed network operators have gone to the market to actually then engage with the flexibility provider to say, I would like to procure with you on this basis. They have received feedback on what that, on what would be, from their perspective would be reasonable or not.
Okay, we have time, just a brief time for one last question from Christine. Go ahead, Christine.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for your presentation. I was wondering regarding the value of flexibility, how you incorporated, or whether you incorporated also the supply and demand of flexibility. So when like demand grows, there's also more supply of flexibility, considering it's coming from EVs, for example, and that impacts the value of flexibility. And especially at the DSO level, if the DSOs don't know what's going on in their grid, like how do they know how much flexibility they would need, and how you dealt with this in your analysis or approach?
Yeah, I mean, I think what the value of flexibility should be is like $1 million question, one that depends on so many things, right? So as you say, like if in a future state of the world, if there are, well, lots of EVs, but there are also then these vehicle to grid type schemes that are sufficiently organized, and there's a sufficiently liquid market that can pool all of these EVs together and then provide flexibility to system operators. In that state of the world, you would imagine that the cost for flexibility will be quite low. But as DNOs are realizing now that to be able to make sure that these liquid markets can exist in the future, they will have to maybe procure at a higher costs today to actually start almost like, in a sense, facilitating the creation of the market that they will then in the future, turn to deploy and start using more of. And this is it's a very, it's a discussion that we've already started to have as part of, because the distributed system operators here in the UK are required by the regulator as part of like their future business plans that they're providing for the next price control period, to provide for like, I guess, a clear indication of how much flexibility they're planning to procure and at what costs. And this uncertainty we have like tried to like reflect as best as possible in these business plans, because it is quite unclear. Like, well, I mean, you may have a sense of what the costs are today, and they vary quite a bit depending on, you're talking about a vehicle to grid scheme versus you're talking about a factory turning down, one electricity intensive process, or you're talking about a dispatchable generator firing itself up when as needed. The costs will vary quite significantly across like these different participants, and they will vary even more so as if you sort of envision a world in the future where the regulation and the stakeholders have invested in actually developing liquid enough markets that then help bring the costs down, because there is greater participation and there's greater accessibility of that flexibility. But it's conditional upon so many factors, I would say.
Yeah, in the interest of time, I'm afraid we'll have to leave that there. But let me just ask you, Hubert, do you have a very brief question to pose?
Just a concern. When buying long-term flexibility or developing long-term flexibility markets, price signals have to be constant. And if one is to develop a flexibility portfolio at a high price clearance, that business model may not be valid at low price clearances. So if you, in other words, it's not worth developing flexibility by overpaying them, because at some point you need to land on a correct price, and well, you may just crash the liquidity of the market just by the price. So it's not. I do not share that strategy to overpay and hope to land on a lower price.
Yeah, so okay, I won't say that is
just briefly, Abbas, just briefly, because we need to move on to the next presentation.
Yes, certainly. So I wouldn't say that that's necessarily like the only strategy, right? So there are, as you very correctly note, trade-offs to deployment of that strategy, and indeed, in terms of like price signals, it is in a way not very different from conventional power plants developing, setting up operations in a world where renewables didn't play much of a role. and then later on, realize that the wholesale markets start to fall as more and more, lower marginal cost generation starts entering these markets. So there is inevitably uncertainty associated with what the price evolution in these markets are going to be, and they'll be guided by a bunch of factors. But one thing you can know for sure is that if you didn't invest in the market, it's not going to exist 5 years down the line, when you actually would have needed it and could have effectively deployed it to actually try and defer your capex to a later period, or indeed avoid.
We will have to leave it there, but I thank you very much for Abbas, a very interesting presentation. Next up is a paper by Karim Anaya from the University of Cambridge. And she's going to tell us about a study whose aim was really to analyze and evaluate the operation, the effectiveness of some of the various ways in which flexibility services are being provided around the world. So Karim, it's up to you. You are muted.
Sorry. Okay. James, thanks very much for the introduction, and to you all for being here. So let me share my screen, please. So can you see it, please?
Yes.
Hopefully.
It's good.
Oh, sorry. I think that I have. Let me activate my other. Is it all right now, or can you still?
Yeah.
Sorry.
That shows, I don't know if that shows your notes in your next slide.
Yeah, my laptop just is frozen. I don't know why. Sorry. So should be.
Try taking the display settings option up at the top.
Yeah, it should be just one, but I'm not sure. So is this, I don't know why I have to, okay. I don't know how to remove this other small, screen here. I mean, it never happened before to me, but.
Would you mind try taking the display settings up at the top?
Top line.
So.
Just over to the left where it says display settings. If you open that menu, what does that let you do?
Oh, display settings.
Yes.
What? Can't see it. Sorry.
Next one over to the right.
So it's close to which of the?
Just to the right.
Okay. More.
Yes.
Move your cursor a couple inches to the right.
Yeah, but cannot. Oh dear.
Not sure we are, sorry to interrupt, but I'm not sure we are all seeing the same thing. So
I will, sorry for that. I will stop sharing now and I will try again, okay? Right?
Yeah, that's a good option here.
It should work. So let me, I don't know what's going on. Okay. Now,
From here, I would take slideshow.
yeah, it's all right.
Yay. Good.
Sorry for that. Okay, so well, first of all, thanks, James, very much for the introduction. I am also very happy because the two talks that we just listen are very related to the talks that I will give now. So I just wanted to tell you something before I start. So I can get stuck sometimes when I talk because I have data. So don't blame, please, the internet connection if there is a silence from my side. So it's just me, and I am fine with this, no? So so this is a joint work with my colleague Michael Pollitt. He is also from the EPRG. So this is based on a study that we did also for a distribution company, SCN, from GP. So we have complete 3 reports until now, and this talk is focused on the first 2. So we are very grateful to the different organizations that provided valued inputs. So here we are going to, so what we did here is just to explore the international experience in the procurement of flexibility services, mainly by distribution companies, in order to identify key lessons. No? So this is that helps to understand how network operators, especially DSOs, are currently using flexibility services or planning to use them to deal with grid management issues, and the way that this can be translated in better operation and planning of the network. So we think that this is very important because DSOs are becoming more active with key challenges due to the integration of more renewables. Then we believe that contracting flexibility services can be beneficial. So just in case all the reports that we have written, you know, as part of this study are already in the project website. So, so we have selected 13 use cases from 7 jurisdictions from Europe, Australasia, and Asia. For doing this, we review a set of public funded demonstrations projects. We also look at independent initiatives from DSOs, and also those that are supported by the European Commission and more. No? Questionnaire was also designed to capture a standardized key information for each case. So, so here you can see the list of use cases that were evaluated. So we have the deliberately selected use cases that cover diverse perspectives. So we opted, for instance, for the ones recent implemented. We think that, I mean, the energy sector is evolving with new developments in the regulation, and also in terms of technology and commercial arrangements. So this is why we look at the most, you know, recent ones. And we have selected as well a mix of demonstrators and business as usual. As you can see, most of the projects that I show here are led by DSOs, and a few of them by independent or platforms. So in order to evaluate these use cases, we raised, a set of questions. No, the first one is about the smart solutions in the form of tools or capabilities that distribution companies and others need to develop to facilitate the procurement of flexibility services. The next one is focus on the market the market design, where a set of parameters is evaluated. No? Then we explore the different models that the DSOs are using now to contract and capture the value of flexibility, including the participation of third parties. The way how DSOs value flexibility is key. Then we want to know whether flexibility is valued using regulated prices or maybe full market-based prices, or maybe there is any methodology, to do it. Then we identify the most, and least common trends in the procurement of flexibility. No, here we want to see what else it can be done to capture its value by the DSOs, and also benefits to the customers. Finally, the role of regulation in encouraging the use of flexibility services is explored too, based on our findings from the use cases. No? So here, this table, this and the second one, because I have to here. So just make a comparison of the different use case studies, especially in terms of market design. No? So we can see that DSOs contract flexibility services differently. We also observe that some markets are more mature than others, which I mean with business as usual initiatives, especially in those where independent platforms are operating, which is the case, for instance, in GB with Picroflex, and also in the Netherlands, we can see here with Copax. No, we also observe a picture of prices rules that may depend on the type of contracts. Let's say short term versus long term, or also in the type of customers, where we are talking about residential versus commercial or business ones, and in some cases also based on the type of voltage. I mean, a high voltage versus low voltage. No. So okay. So then here you can see. I will talk about just the main handies. These are explained based on the set of questions that I mentioned, which are 6. So in terms of the use of smart architectures and solutions, so these are important, to facilitate the communication, the control and access to flexibility. It is also important to activate the bids and the optimal selection of them. No, we identify, the different solutions. Some of them are integrated within the DSOs, others within the independent platforms. And here I can list some of the ones that we identify, for instance, DERMS, which is the distributed energy resources management system, is among the most used here in GB. And then we look at the market design for flexibility services. So we can see that this is still a work in progress, with some exceptions, such as the case in GB, for instance, with big flex. So there are different methods, also pricing rules. Also, there is a lot of diversity in the remuneration schemes. For instance, we have here the availability payments, the utilization ones, depending on the type of services. We have both as well. Well, and then let's talk about the new business model. So there are different channels to procure flexibility. So we observe that the new business models involve the participation of aggregators, for instance, which are good because they can, mitigate the risk of non-delivery, and many of them can also facilitate the participation of residential customers with a small scale resources. Ideally, the DSOs expect the involvement of several aggregators. However, in the lack of them, some adjustments may be required. No? For instance, this was the case in Dynamo, where only one aggregator was available, and as a response, the DSO, opted for the use of regulated prices. We also have the independent platforms such as GoPacks and Nodes, which increase the chance to match, for instance, supply and demand, and are also good examples of coordination platforms. Then I will move quickly. So in terms of the value of flexibility, we identify different approaches with fixed and maximum rates, with some specifics ranges too. Others are just established by regulation. Some fixed values are set, for instance, based on average ones from previous projects, especially in GB. Some others, for instance, provide a range of potential revenues. That there is also a proposal of common methodology, which has been already, mentioned in this session, which has been developed by the Energy Networks Association in the UK. In terms of most and less common trends, most of them use flexibility to solve, for instance, congestion. There is a diverse range of technologies and also with flexible loads. However, what we observe less in terms, for instance, of the auction mechanisms is the use of pay as clear rather than pay as bid, and also the procurement of a specific, ancillary services such as reactive power. We also, finally, we go to the role of regulation. So based on the evaluation that we made, there are different ways that regulation can help. This can be, for instance, via innovation projects, also by adapting the price control schemes to promote more flexible networks. For instance, using TOTEX regulation. Well, I think that I don't have too much time, so I will just move to the last slide. So what we can say here, based on the 6 questions we raised, is that the development of new tools, or new capabilities from the DSOs, should be easy to understand and access, and also with extensive stakeholder engagement. There is, as I said before, there is still a lot of experimentation, in the procurement of flexibility services. However, in the medium term, we will expect the adoption of clear rules regarding market design. The third point is that having a cost-benefit methodology can help, for instance, to measure the value of flexibility versus other businesses' usual solutions. And then the DSOs are able to identify new business models to procure flexibility service. It can be with aggregators via independent platforms, but at the end, they are responsible to identify the source of value and market test them. The final point, regulation plays an important role in encouraging the use of flexibility by the DSO, via a set of mechanisms, which I have already, mentioned. So yes, as last point, just want to say that the role of regulation is fully discussed in the third report. That's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Karim. Is that third report, it's complete and posted in that first slide you showed us?
Yes,
That's
exactly.
available?
So yeah, and it's quite good because it discuss many of the points that the two speakers, have mentioned here.
Yeah, so I wanted to
yeah.
point that out to everyone here that you might want to
Yeah.
pursue that third report as well. Now, in the interest of time, since I see no hands up, I want to move directly to the last speaker. It was to be Antoine Jourdain from Methodist, and he was going to tell us about the relative value seen from the DSO side of various components of smart grid elements. He's not able to be here, but his colleague, Hubert Dupin, is taking his place. And Mr. Dupin, you'll have to explain if the theme or the subject has shifted a bit as a result of that. So the floor is yours. You will have to unmute. If you hover over your
Hubert?
picture. Yes, good, good. Now you're muted again, so if you...
Okay, hello?
There we go.
Okay, excuse me. So I'm head of the, do you see properly my slides?
Yes, I do.
Okay. So I'm head of the flexibility department at Enedis. And unfortunately, so Antoine Jourdain cannot make it up tonight, but the presentation was concerning what we did from that economic assessment of smart grids in 2017. And actually, we made a reality of flexibility. So I wanted to share that with you. Enedis is the main distribution company in France. We operate 95% of the network and up to 20 kilovolts. It's in Europe, as you know, DSO operate different level of tensions, and some operate higher level of tensions, but we only operate up to 20 kilovolts, which has an effect on liquidity and depth of liquidity. So like I said, in 2017, we did an assessment of smart grid solutions. And the goal was to give information to the whole smart grid sector regarding what flexibility was worth, how much we would make of it, and talking about flexibility, how much we were willing to pay, what would be the collective value. So actually in 2017, there were 3 companion papers sponsored by the French government. One was made by the DSOs, which actually aimed at assessing the value of those smart grid solutions. Our regulator published a paper, the energy regulator commanded a study which aimed at how many opportunities of flexibility where one could envision. And we had our Department of Energy who made a survey or an assessment of how much flexibility would be available in the industry based on the price that will be paid and the duration of activation. So in a sense, in 2017, all market players had the whole vision of the price of flexibility, the volume of flexibility, and to some extent, liquidity and depth. So it's quite a unique perspective in Europe. Unfortunately, papers were published in French. However, if some of you can understand French, I would really encourage you to get a look into that papers. Those are 100 or 200 pages paper. It's a significant and consistent work that has been done there. So to sum up some of the results, we studied several technology which have been developed, but my main focus today will be on flexibility. So flexibility is an option. Depends on the situation and the correct investment. And I will show I will go into more details on the method. So as in terms of the technology, we had a different situation. Some we could deploy them throughout the whole territory. Basically, it's technology that are used in the operations control tools, so they can apply anywhere on the territory. Some depend on the local situation, such as centralized voltage control, which we could deploy out of 1 out of 10 primary substation, for example. And active power curtailment, it depends on the situation, but we can connect up to 700 megawatts. I will go into more details. And flexibility, that's the main focus of my presentation. So I will show you how it works. So basically from that starting point, we targeted flexibilities, and we went a deep further into use cases. And those use cases can be divided into 2 types: those that can foster renewable connection. So at the time of connection, at the time of producer's connection, we can put some flexibility in the design of the network and the connection. And after connection, when consumer or producers increase their usage of the network, then that's where we can kick in investment deferral, resilience, and works planning. So basically, from those 5 use cases, my job is to make those use cases a reality within the next few years at Enedis. So in 2017, we published economic assessment. In October 2019, we published our vision of flexibility, how much flexibility are worth and how we can make use of them. And now we'll go into more detail into economic assessment of flexibility, how much it is worth. I think it's important to spend a bit time on that slide, because from what I heard today, maybe we could go back to the fundamentals. So when DSO assess value of the network and their costs, they start from the initial situation. So it's today's situation. Over the future, we have technical losses. Actually, as one may know, DSOs are one of the larger electricity buyer in the country. In France, Enedis is by 7% of French electricity just to cover technical losses. So it's Joule effects and losses in our transformers. And so, of course, it's an expense that one has to optimize in network development. And of course, we have some situation where we cannot supply energy to all our customers, and that has some economical value, which we value at 30 kilo euros per megawatt hour. So if we do not supply an area, we assume a collective loss. So it's a loss for the collectivity at 30 kilo euros per megawatt hour. So that's the initial situation. And then when we envision an investment, of course, an investment will reduce technical losses. A larger cable, a bigger transformer, a newer transformer has smaller or technical losses than today's equipment. Of course, that investment will tremendously reduce the lost load, and that investment comes at a cost. Of course, it's annuity of the cost. So we use a public asset annuity cost of 4.5%. So of course, when you envision investment, it does reduce the cost of the network. On that slide, to simplify the assessment, I do not show maintenance costs, but it's the same idea. You can plug it into the methods. So you start from the initial situation, and just by considering investment, you bring some collective benefits to the network. And then you see, okay, there is another solution. Maybe there is flexibility, and then you assess how much flexibility, what what good can it bring to the network? Flexibility have a very marginal effect on technical losses, just because flexibility is maybe 10 hours a year. That leaves more than 8,000 hours without flex. So basically, it's very marginal effect on technical losses. Flexibility do reduce lost load, not all of lost load, because flexibility needs some time to kick in. Due to the topology of the network, you may not be able to recover all lost load. So that's a cost that still remains on the network. Then you have some additional costs to enable flex, such as new IT equipment just to communicate with those flexibility sources. You need additional command control equipment because you may put some equipment in overcharge in case flex fails. And you need additional protections because flexibility may kick in without the operations controls room knowledge. So basically you have some additional costs, and then you have the cost of the service. And the collective benefit created by flex is that little green arrow, which is the difference between the total cost with flex and the efficiency and the cost of the equipment. So it's a fraction of the technical impact or the economical impact of flexibility. And on that graph, you see that if the cost of the equipment is fairly low, if it does reduce a lot of the technical losses, well, the efficiency of the investment may go below today's losses. And so there will be absolutely no economical space for flexibility. One can also see on that graph is that one kicks in the cost of the investment that one plans over the future years. And in terms of losses and reduction of losses of lost load, it's only for the duration of the flexibility. So in other words, with that method of assessment, you do balance long-term investment and the cost of a long-term planification of the investment and its immediate effect on the network and the immediate effect of flexibility. So in other words, with that method, you are sure not to over-invest or to invest in too large equipment. If you do so, then the cost of equipment will be too high, and then it does leave more room for flexibility. So that's basically the whole method that we use at Enedis. And with that method, well, there is a maximum value for flexibility. We did a survey of several offers, many technical projects, and as a maximum price or the price of flexibility, depending on the local situation, ranges from 0, where flex has absolutely no economical space, to something like 20 kilo-euros per megawatt per year on medium voltage. When one can see that flexibility does compete with equipment, so there is a maximum price. If flex is too expensive, then investment is the best technology and there is no price for flexibility. So that's the whole idea with assessing flexibility. There is a maximum price. So based on that economic assessment, we are now ready to offer some smart conditional connection within the next few weeks. We did an assessment, so those are the figures from the assessment of 2017. We can target about 50 to 80 megawatts renewables per year. That's about 10 projects per year. Today we have 200 megawatts, 200 medium voltage, producers project per year. So it's about 5% of producers that will benefit from such smart connections, of where they will actually have an interest into accepting a conditional offer. What's a conditional offers? Well, today we are required to connect producers without any curtailment. To do so, we may reinforce the network at some times or at some to cover network situations that are very rare. One can maybe think of another situation, which is on the right-hand side, where we will do less work, but of course that may prevent the producer to inject at full capacity some very little time. And of course, there is a balance between an expensive connection with no constraint or a cheaper connection with some constraints. Of course, a producer will have the choice whether he wants a no constraint connection that may be expensive, or a cheaper constraint with some constraints, or a cheaper connection with some constraints. So in terms of making it business as usual, we have a decision from our regulator dating from 2 years ago. We have a decree from the Department of Energy 1 year ago. We are waiting final regulatory evolution, which fine-tunes the decree. We are doing ongoing final consultation with stakeholders and producers as to how we will contract those smart connections. And of course, it's a matter of making tools, methods, and information system online with those offers. Now I want to share with you something that is quite interesting and I believe quite unique in Europe as to connecting producers. The way it works in France is that the TSO, the transport system operator, and the DSOs do a joint optimization of the network and a long-term joint optimization of the network. The TSO does a survey of all renewable projects, regardless of their maturity. So maybe they have applied for connection, or it's just projects that they have in their mind. The TSO put in there the targets of the national or regional targets of the national policy regarding renewable connection. And with that amount of producers project, TSO and DSO plan the optimal network. So it's a long-term optimal optimization of the network. With that optimization, it does allow TSO and DSO to anticipate reinforcement work. And actually, it's better to optimize on long term and the whole with the whole survey of projects rather than trying to connect producers one by one when they arrive. So first of all is today's situation. That optimization is quite unique in Europe, and it prevents us from having a long delay time before connecting producers. Now, the second idea is to kick in flexibility, and considering that we may have a better situation by designing that joint connecting scheme with the TSO with flexibility. When you look at the load duration curve, say for PV, there are only a few hours per year where they produce at full capacity. It's about less than 20 hours per year where they produce at more than 90% of their capacity. If you also consider that solar energy and wind energy is not produced at 100% capacity at the same time, it's more likely that wind will be in winter and sun in summertime, then obviously you can see that you can optimize a bit more the network. And then you go to the central map of France that shows how much more producers you can connect on the transformers than we do today with our rules. So in south of France, we can connect more than 50% more producers than with normal design. When we project those numbers over the long term, so by 2035, it does reduce the cost of connection by 30%. That's CapEx, but it does come with a little bit of curtailment. Actually, curtailment is very reduced. It's less than 0.06% of energy curtailment with that scheme, and that allows us to save 30% CapEx. So the overall effect is about 300 million euros savings, 50 million euros loss of opportunities, that is energy that could be produced but not actually injected into the network. So net balance is 250 million euros. So with that project, we are trying to make it a reality on 2 experiments that we are about to start in 2 regions of France. basically on 8 primary stations, we will release 200 megawatt capacity. Those 200 megawatts capacity are already worth 9 million euros. So with avoiding 9 million euros investment, we can connect 200 more megawatts capacity than today. So experiment will kick off in the coming weeks, and within a few months from now, within a few years from now, we will get some feedback, and then we will make it business as usual reality in 2024, 2025. Then when it comes to market design, well, again, I want to share some facts. Well, it's a responsibility of system operators to analyze grid constraints and assess flexibility opportunities that are to publish where, when, and how much flexibility there is available, or that could be useful to the network. So DSO express demand. And then it's a matter of market players to recruit flexible sites and provide reliable flex services. And while it's a truism to say that there is market, there is a contract when offer matches demand in price and specs. So we published in 2017 how much flex was worth. So we published how much flex there might be. We published in France what flex would be worth buying flexibility sources. In other words, all market players have all the tools in hand to develop their businesses at long-term prices. That's why I wanted to react beforehand. It's really important to give long-term visibility to market players. That's what we've done since 2017. We did a first tender last year. We signed 2 contracts. We did a new tender this spring in 3 more zones. And we will do some additional tendering for new use cases. Sorry. Beforehand, I presented a direct curtailment of producers as a solution of optimization to optimize connection of renewables. Well, instead of curtailing production, we may go instead for market-based flexibility for an even more economical situation. So we will test that market design later this year. So we believe that with such long-term visibility, we will develop the market. I also want to stress another truism is that as soon as you're connected on a distribution network, you can value your flexibility for national mechanisms or I would say for balancing markets or ultimately for markets that will go for frequency mechanisms. So when you are flexible, when you are connected on the network, anytime, anywhere, you can value your flexibility. Now, when it comes to valuing flexibility for a DSO, you have to be at the right time and at the right place to value your flexibility. So when market players want to develop a flexibility portfolio, they are encouraged to do so for national mechanisms. Value for national mechanisms is also higher than value for DSO. That's why we wanted to publish those economic assessments. However, if they have the opportunity to add their business plan, the one for national mechanisms that is always there, and the one for local flexibilities for DSO that may be there at some times, then it's a bonus for market players. So because market players can also train to master flexibility services at any scale they want, because they can value their services on national mechanisms, we feel that we can engage in mature discussions. So we publish specifications, like I said, where, when, how much flexibility we would like, and then it's a matter of those market players to address our needs and offer a reliable flex services. I also want, well, yes.
May you possibly wrap up in the next minute?
Yes.
So we still have a little time for questions.
Sure.
Thank you.
That's what I want to stress is that well, local flexibility become a reality. So again, from that assessment from 2017, we are going real with real money involved. We have real contracts. So it's quite a challenge and an enthusiasm that we have at ENEDIS. We have published a roadmap, again, to give visibility to players as to when we would industrialize flexibility and how much it would be worth. Again, there is limited value for local flexibility. Maybe I can put it in another way. We have 40,000 sites. We have 36 million customers at ENEDIS. However, there are only 40,000 flexible customers active on national mechanisms. So it's 1 out of 1,000 customers. When you go to medium voltage, it means that on average, we have 1 flexible customer per feeder. It is way not enough to have a liquid or depth market. If we go to low voltage, it's 1 flexible customer on average out of 20 MV, LV transformer. So it's not what I call a liquid market. If we click in targets to develop flexibility for national mechanisms, we may multiply those figures by 10. It still does not make everywhere, anytime, a liquid market. So I believe that flexibility will be valued on national markets. We will make use of those flexibility assets where and when they will match our needs, but we cannot subsidize flexibility because it's not a collective value creation. So with that, I will leave it to the questions.
Very good. Thank you, Hubert. And we do have just a couple of minutes. So
Yes.
if you have a question, let me see your hand. Yeah, Théo, go ahead.
Yes, thank you very much for the presentation. I just have a question. You insist a lot on the purpose and flexibility will be multi-purpose. Do you don't think so? Then maybe flexibility for DSO will be different than flexibility for TSO, and it necessitates to develop specific services or assets. I mean, in terms of size, services, level of availability.
No, I do not think it is viable. It is not economically viable to develop flexibility specifically for the DSO needs. On average, it will only concern 1% of the territory at any given time. First of all. Second of all, we believe it is our duty to increase or to have a good cooperation with transporters so that flexibility assets can value their assets on both markets, but they will certainly value it every day, anytime, as I say, on national mechanisms, and highly unlikely on the distribution network. So if I were a developer of flexibility assets, I would really target national mechanisms, and I will make best use of DSO opportunities when they happen and where they happen, but it's not the other way around.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Now, Karim, go ahead.
Thanks, James. One of the use cases that we discussed in the study that we made was the case of nice smart pallet. And one of the critiques that I found here is that the price that ENEDIS set for flexibility, which is 24 euros per kilowatt per year, it's too low for for the case that they were, developed. So I would like to know your thoughts in terms of the size of the value of
Well,
flexibility.
we envision flexibility as a new lever to optimize our cost. So as DSO, all DSO have the only one goal to give the best quality to the lowest price to our customers. So it's not flexibility per se, it's just to give a service at a cheaper cost. So that's what is shown on that graph. Flexibility has to create some benefits. So there is a maximum price. If flexibility is not provided, well, investment will be there. If flexibility is provided at too high a cost, then it's competition. When your competitor is cheaper, so investment will be cheaper. At some point, there is an opportunity for flex, but it is in a competition. So the best economical solution will be definitely preferred by the DSO. So if flexibility beats the investment, we will choose flexibility. If flexibility does not beat investment, we will choose the investment. So the maximum price depends on the local situation. It depends on the consumption and production in that area. It depends on the topology of the network. It depends on the local situation. But overall, the price will be somewhere in the range of 0 to 24, depending on the local situation, but it will not be higher than that. It's just the economy. You do compete with an external price. So in terms of markets, it's quite a strange market because scarcity does not shoot the price up. Scarcity, if you have no flex, will go without flex. And the price is exogenous to the market flexibility. So it's just the price of the equipment, transformer, the cables, trenches. So there is indeed a maximum price to flexibility. If it's too low for flexibility providers, well, it's too low for flexibility providers. There is no other solution than that. Volume and market, again, is on national mechanism, and those markets will drive amounts and prices, will drive amount up and prices down. But the DSO must operate the network and reduce their cost, and flexibility valued on national mechanisms will be paid at their price. So
Okay, well, thank you for that.
Okay, thank you.
With apologies to Christine, I'm afraid we're about to be shut out here. But I thank all of our speakers and all of the audience for the conversation that we've had today. Thank you all.
thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Hey, thanks, guys.
Bye.
Good job.
Bye-bye.